Imagine looking at a map of Europe and watching the entire southeastern flank of NATO crumble in a single afternoon. It sounds like fiction, right? But the pieces are already moving on the chessboard. We are talking about a scenario that keeps generals in the Pentagon awake at night. Turkey, a NATO powerhouse, turning its back on the West and accepting direct military aid from Russia to confront Greece. If this happens, it's not just a border dispute. It is the end of the alliance as we know it. Welcome to the Global Code. Before we unravel this crisis, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We are decoding the future of geopolitics, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's be real for a second. For decades, we have been told that Turkey and Greece are allies. They sit at the same table in Brussels. They fly the same flags in NATO exercises. But beneath the surface, the water in the Aegean Sea is boiling. Tensions have risen and fallen for a century, but something is different now. The rhetoric is sharper. The weapons are bigger. And there is a third player entering the game who has been waiting for this exact moment: Russia. We have to ask the hard question: what actually happens if Ankara calls Moscow? What if President Erdogan decides that the West has favored Greece one too many times, and he accepts Vladimir Putin's offer of help? This isn't just about who owns a few small islands. This is about control of the Mediterranean, the flow of energy to Europe, and the shattering of the American security order. Today we are going to run the simulation. We are going to walk through the military, diplomatic, and economic fallout of a Turkey-Russia pact against Greece. To understand the explosion, we have to look at the fuse. Why would Turkey, a nation that has been part of NATO since 1952, risk everything to side with Russia? It comes down to a feeling of isolation. Over the last 10 years, Turkey has felt increasingly cornered. They look at the map and see an alliance forming against them. They see Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel building pipelines and signing maritime deals that effectively lock Turkey out of the Eastern Mediterranean energy bonanza. From the Turkish perspective, the map looks unfair. You have islands like Castellorizo, which is a tiny Greek island just 1 mile off the Turkish coast, being used to claim huge swathes of ocean territory for Greece. Turkey argues that this traps them on their own coastline. When they complain to the US or the EU, they feel ignored. They see the US lifting arms embargoes on Cyprus. They see American bases expanding in Greece. And they start to think, if our allies are surrounding us, maybe we need new friends. And that is where Russia steps in. Putin doesn't necessarily love Turkey. Historically, they have fought a dozen wars, but Putin loves chaos within NATO. If he can drive a wedge between Ankara and Athens, he achieves his greatest strategic goal without firing a single shot. He breaks the southern wall of NATO. Let's play out the scenario. It is the near future. A naval incident occurs in the Aegean. Maybe a Turkish frigate and a Greek jet get too close. Shots are fired. A pilot is down. Tensions skyrocket. Normally, Washington would step in to de-escalate. But in this timeline, let's say the US response is seen as too pro-Greek by Ankara. President Erdogan feels backed into a corner. He needs leverage. He needs a game changer. So, the call goes to the Kremlin. The headline flashes across screens worldwide. Turkey accepts Russian naval and intelligence support in Aegean dispute. The world freezes. This is the moment everything changes. It wouldn't start with Russian troops landing on Turkish beaches. It would start with something much more subtle and dangerous: information. The first thing Russia offers isn't tanks, it's blindness. Russia possesses some of the most advanced electronic warfare capabilities on Earth. Imagine Russian mobile jamming stations moving to the Turkish coast. Suddenly, the radar picture for Greek and NATO forces gets fuzzy. Communications start to glitch. The eyes of the Greek Air Force, their ability to track Turkish jets, are compromised. Russia could integrate its S-400 missile systems, which Turkey already owns, with its own satellite data, giving Turkey a god's eye view of every Greek movement in the Aegean, while blinding the other side. This shifts the balance of power immediately. The Greek Air Force, which relies heavily on Western technology, would face a nightmare. Their F-16s and Rafale jets would be flying into a digital fog. For the US, this is a catastrophe. American jets flying from bases in Crete or aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean would suddenly find themselves being tracked by Russian-made radars operating from inside a NATO country. the secret codes, the data links, the friend or foe identification systems, everything is at risk of being compromised by Russian technicians sitting in Turkish control rooms. Next, we look at the sea. The Aegean is a maze of islands. Greece relies on its navy to defend them. But Russia has a massive naval presence in the Black Sea and a port in Syria. If Turkey opens the straits, the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, exclusively for Russian warships while closing them to others, the strategic map flips. Imagine Russian submarines visiting Turkish ports for maintenance and then patrolling the waters near Cyprus. They don't even have to fire. Just their presence acts as a shield for Turkish drill ships. If a Greek frigate tries to stop a Turkish drilling operation, they aren't just facing the Turkish Navy anymore. They are staring down a Russian nuclear-powered submarine lurking nearby. This is what we call hybrid warfare. Russia provides the muscle and the diplomatic cover, allowing Turkey to push its claims aggressively. It forces Greece into a terrible choice. Do you fire on a Turkish ship and risk hitting a Russian asset starting World War III? Or do you back down and lose your territory? Now let's move to Brussels, the headquarters of NATO. The mood is panic. Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an attack on one is an attack on all. But what happens when the attacker and the defender are both in NATO? The alliance has no mechanism for this. Usually the US acts as the referee. But in this scenario, Turkey has already signaled that it doesn't trust the referee. If the US threatens sanctions, Erdogan points to his new Russian partners. If the US threatens to pull military assets, Turkey threatens to kick the Americans out of Incirlik Air Base, which is crucial for US operations in the Middle East. NATO becomes paralyzed. France would likely scream for immediate support of Greece. Germany, terrified of losing trade or triggering a refugee crisis, might call for caution. The alliance splits down the middle. This is exactly what Putin wants. The consensus required for NATO to act becomes impossible to achieve. The organization effectively becomes brain dead. Let's talk hardware. This is where it gets technical but fascinating. Greece has been modernizing its air force, buying French Rafale jets and looking at American F-35s. These are superior aircraft. Turkey was kicked out of the F-35 program and flies older F-16s. On paper, Greece has the technological edge. But if Russia enters the chat, they bring the Su-35 or even the Su-57 fighters. If Turkey allows Russian jets to operate from its air bases under the guise of joint training, the Greek advantage evaporates. Furthermore, Russian air defense systems, the S-400s, create a no-go zone over the Aegean. Any Greek jet taking off to intercept a Turkish intrusion would be locked on the moment its wheels left the tarmac. The psychological pressure on Greek pilots would be immense. You are flying knowing that a button push away, a Mach 4 missile is coming for you, and your own allies in NATO can T-stop it because the radar locking onto you belongs to a friendly nation. We cannot ignore the money. Wars, even cold wars, are expensive. The moment this alliance is announced, the markets would crash. The Turkish lira is already volatile. This move might initially tank it. But if Russia pumps in billions in stabilization funds or offers cheap gas, Turkey might weather the storm. For Europe, the nightmare is energy. Europe has been trying to wean itself off Russian gas. They were hoping the Eastern Mediterranean, waters claimed by Greece and Cyprus, would be the new source of gas. But if Turkey and Russia control those waters, Europe is back in a chokehold. Putin would effectively control the tap from the north, Russia, and the south, the Mediterranean. Tourism in the region would vanish. Who wants to go on a beach holiday in Rhodes or Antalya when warships are circling? The price of everything from oil to iPhones would go up in the US and Europe because the supply chain is disrupted. So, what does the President of the United States do? This is the ultimate test of American diplomacy. The US cannot simply bomb Turkey. They store nuclear weapons there. They cannot fully back Greece without completely losing Turkey to the Russian sphere of influence forever, creating a massive hostile bloc in the Middle East. The US would likely try a massive economic strangulation of Turkey, sanctions like we have never seen, but sanctions take time to work, and battles happen in minutes. The US might move the Sixth Fleet into the Aegean as a buffer. Imagine American aircraft carriers sitting between the Turkish and Greek navies. It is a high-stakes game of chicken. One accident, one miscalculation, and you have US sailors firing on Turkish ships or Russian missiles hitting American planes. This pushes the US closer to a Fortress America mindset. If they can't manage their own allies, the American public might ask, why are we even in NATO? A withdrawal of American interest from Europe would be the final nail in the coffin for the Western order. Let's look at the people on the ground. In Turkey, this move would be sold as a war of independence. The media would frame it as Turkey finally standing up to Western imperialism. Nationalism would surge. In Greece, the feeling would be existential dread mixed with fierce determination. Greece views the Aegean as its ancestral heart. They would mobilize every reservist. The diaspora, Greeks in America, Australia, UK, would mobilize massively to pressure their governments to intervene. We would see cyber warfare spilling over into civilian life. Hackers from both sides and Russian bot farms would target power grids, banks, and hospitals. Regular citizens in Athens and Istanbul might wake up to find their ATMs not working or the internet blacked out. The war wouldn't just be at sea, it would be on everyone's smartphone. We also have to talk about Cyprus. The island is already divided. If Turkey feels emboldened by Russian support, they might move to formally annex the northern part of Cyprus, or push further into the UN buffer zone. This drags the European Union in directly. Cyprus is an EU member. If Turkish troops advance with Russian backing, the EU is obligated to defend its territory. But the EU has no army. They rely on NATO. Do you see the loop? We end up back at the same paralysis. Russia might use this to demand a naval base in northern Cyprus. If that happens, the Mediterranean becomes a Russian lake. The strategic implications for the Suez Canal and Israel are massive. Israel would be incredibly nervous. They have good relations with Russia, but a Turkey-Russia alliance is a nightmare for them. Israel might be forced to intervene militarily to protect its own gas fields, widening the conflict even further. If this alliance holds, the map of the world changes. Turkey leaves the Western sphere. The Iron Curtain moves. It doesn't run through Berlin anymore. It runs through the middle of the Aegean Sea. The Black Sea becomes a Russo-Turkish lake. NATO is pushed back to Italy and the Balkans. The Middle East, seeing the US fail to manage the crisis, might start cutting deals with Moscow and Beijing. We are talking about the end of American hegemony in the region. And for Turkey, it's a gamble of historic proportions. They gain short-term power, but they become dependent on Russia, a country that historically has wanted to dismantle the Ottoman Empire. They trade being a troubled ally of the West for being a junior partner to Putin. Now take a breath. How likely is this? Right now, Turkey and Russia still have opposing interests in Syria, Libya, and the Caucasus. They are frenemies, not blood brothers. Turkey knows that leaving NATO makes them vulnerable to Russia in the long run. Erdogan is a master of balancing acts, playing both sides to get the best deal. And the Russian desire to break the West is very real. All it takes is one leader feeling desperate, one bad calculation, or one stray missile to turn this what if into breaking news. The scariest part of this scenario isn't the weapons. It's the fragility of the alliances we take for granted. We assume the world map is set in stone. It's not. It's drawn in pencil, and there are erasers on the table. Turkey accepting Russian help against Greece would be the geopolitical earthquake of the century. It would change the price of the gas in your car, the safety of the world's oceans, and the security of the Western world. It's a reminder that peace requires constant work, and ignoring the grievances of allies, on both sides, invites disaster. What do you think? Would the US intervene militarily if Turkey attacked Greece? Or would they stay out of it to avoid World War III? I want to see your theories in the comments below. Let's get a real debate going. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please share this video with a friend who loves history or politics. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Global Code for more uncensored geopolitical analysis. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.